The day I left for Australia, I went to the Old Swan in Notting Hill Gate for a last pint with my school friend Tim Dell before we set off for Southampton in his Land Rover.
They say, a bit like the well-known Proustian moment, that music, smells and taste can take you back to any moment in time.
As we emerged from the pub in the September afternoon sun, we were under a high mackerel sky.
And with Rick Stein, an author used to creating culinary masterpieces, his memoir, Under A Mackerel Sky, is peppered with great food and vivid stories.
In Cornwall, the mackerel sky is associated with stormy weather to come, and now it only increased the butterflies in my stomach.
A taster enough to leave us wanting more? I think so. So let's dig in.
Hi, I'm Rick Stein, and you're listening to the Richard and Judy Book Club podcast. Ship departures were so much more heartfelt than going through the departure gate at an airport. There were your friends getting smaller as the gap between you widened, and in my case, the enormity of what I had done was given physical reality.
Rick Stein is one of those iconic culinary forces of nature. We've consumed his incredible food for years, and in this, his memoir, he writes as lyrically about food as he does about himself.
His life has taken him everywhere from Australia to America, but we caught up with him a bit closer to home in North Cornwall.
What originally drove me to write was actually writing cookery books, because I'm a cook really, but what I found more and more I enjoyed was actually writing the sort of editorial, for want of a better word, in the cookery book. So every recipe I write something about the recipe, not necessarily about what's in it, but why I chose the recipe, where I was when I found it, who was the chef who was cooking it, who was the old lady in a little place somewhere in Greece where I found it. And I just that's what I really love doing. And I suppose it's partly because I did English at university, that I've sort of always sort of known how to write, and more I just found that's what I really enjoyed. I think that's, apart from cooking, that's the creativity I really enjoy. And I suppose I know why I chose writing an autobiography, because it's the best story I know, really. And when I say story, I don't mean that bits are made up. It's just that I think most authors probably write autobiographies as novels most of the time.
Rick, this autobiography has been a long time coming, so why now?
I suppose the main reason I've written it now is because my wife Sarah said you can write, and I mean it's sort of, I suppose you might be surprised about that, but really I didn't realise I could write something as long as an autobiography. But the other thing is that, you know, I'm in my 60s now. I mean, I know if you're a sort of pop star or a leading sports personality, you can write your autobiography age 23. But basically, I wanted a bit of time to pass. So I think, you know, really it's about looking back and thinking, you know, what was your life like and what have you made of it?
I was really interested to see that literature has played a big part in your life, and indeed in this book. So is the next book going to be a novel? I mean, do you think you've got a novel in you? The thing
I struggle, I suppose, with the thought of a novel is actually the plot, because the thing about the autobiography is you don't have to make up the plot, it's there. But certainly I would love to write a novel. I think the main reason I would love to, from doing the autobiography, is that you realise that a lot of the things in an autobiography, although I have been as honest as I can, you can't say, because you're actually being hurtful about other people. So the natural follow-on from an autobiography has to be a novel, I think.
In the book, you reveal an array of past careers and jobs that led you to where you are today. Is there perhaps one more change of career in you?
I think I'd be really happy to write more books. I quite fancy, though, if I ever could, doing a bit of radio. I quite enjoy doing interviews on radio, but also I quite envy the jobs of certainly the radio the presenters that have a sort of broad spectrum of what they're can talk about. I've got this friend in Australia who works on ABC who he can literally 1 minute he can be talking to me and then the next minute the Prime Minister.
Right, straight question. Would you ever consider a move back to the days of being a DJ in the Purple Tiger?
I'd love to do one last gig. It's funny, I was in Saint-Tropez for a wedding a couple of months ago, and all my friends were there, and they just said, "Oh, just have a go." And I got them all up and dancing, and by the end, when I sort of thought this is enough, I had them standing on chairs, swaying to "Hey Jude."
Every major moment of your existence is brought to life so well in the book by your recall of sounds and smells, even what you were wearing. Is that a writing ploy you'd seen elsewhere?
I think Nick Hornby was the one that really, I remember when reading High Fidelity and Fever Pitch, it's just that sort of the real sort of enjoyment of the ordinary that makes, I think, makes literature work, really, is when you just, if you're going through a state of sort of high emotion, you just find something, you know, that isn't normally charged with emotion, but it just works. So yeah, I mean, I think my favourite authors would be ones that just use very sort of senses to just highlight what you're going through at the time. You know, if it is, I mean, for me it was food, but also music. And I think sometimes I sort of think about the book, you need to be my age to sort of appreciate the sort of music that I was, because funnily enough, my sons all like the same music as me because I was playing it all the time when they were little.
Rick Stein talks to the Richard and Judy Book Club about Under a Mackerel Sky.
I think it was Andrew Motion just said, you've got to get up in the morning, wash your face and sit down. And that's absolutely right. If you start doing anything apart from washing your face, you're gone, because actually the business of making yourself right is tough. So I just used to do that, and I used to set a timer every morning. For half an hour, I couldn't get up from the desk, and it was just that. And once half an hour's over, you're into an hour, into 2 hours. It's just making yourself and having the routine. And the routine for me was I had to write 1,000 words a day, but in fact I ended up writing about 500. But it's a question of just building up, really, because I think if for the first time for a book, the prospect of having to write, 100, 120,000 words is daunting. But then you realise it's little by little, drip by drip. And so you do have to, I'm sure everybody that writes regularly has a routine. And I also started early in the morning because I'm much more on the ball early in the morning. And honestly, it is such a joy to do. I sort of miss it, really, because it sort of gives you a routine. But also, if you enjoy writing, it is the most enjoyable thing you can do.
I quite enjoy biographies, but I really enjoy autobiographies, and I thought this book was an absolute masterclass, actually, in the art of writing about one's past and integrating it into the present. It's beautifully written, don't you think? I mean, I think even the very title, Under a Mackerel Sky, which is an expression his grandfather used to use, but cut that family connection out, just as a title, Under a Mackerel Sky, is beautiful. It has so many meanings, and obviously there's a foodie reference to it as well. But it typifies the quality of the writing of this book. Sort of possibly cruelly, I wondered as I began reading it, has he had a hand here? Has he had a ghost to help him here? Not at all. This is the authentic voice.
He's very bright.
Oh, I know he is, but writing is writing, and this is the authentic voice of Rick Stein, writing his own story, sitting there, considering his words, measuring them like jewels. It's beautiful, and yet it's very down to earth, very, very accessible. I think it's one of the best autobiographies I've read in the last decade. I really do.
I think it goes a long way to explaining Rick Stein as a character and personality. I mean, if you just watch him on the television with his cookery shows and everything, I think you can't help but be struck by how sort of diffident he is.
Yes.
I mean, he's not a kind of boastful man at all. He doesn't even seem, despite his huge success in every sense, he doesn't even seem a particularly confident man. No. He doesn't seem to assume very much. He seems a little shy. And that's why everybody loves him, of course. He seems a little shy and completely non-presumptuous. And actually, if you read this book, you understand why, because he had, in his early life, with his father and everything, a lot of great sadness in his early life. His father committed suicide, and he had a lot to come to terms with. And I think you really get a sense, a lot of the time when you read celebrity autobiographies, they just tell you the bits that they think you ought to know,
or
which will kind of
their reputation.
feed into their image and everything. Yeah. But Rick doesn't do that in this book at all. You feel you're getting the real Rick, warts and all.
In a way, it makes it easier to remember it sort of idyllically if something goes wrong, because I mean, if it had just been wonderful after that, there's not the sort of pain of sort of nostalgia in a way. And I mean, so I sort of feel a bit sorry for my dad, because in a sense I used his bipolar disorder and his suicide as a sort of catalyst for those blue remembered hills, you know, the time when I was a child and how wonderful it was, but B, about the sort of the end of the Garden of Eden. And it sort of works as a basic human plot, you know. One minute everything's fine and the next minute it all goes topsy-turvy.
It's also very funny. I mean, he's extremely funny about his adolescent years and his life as a young man and the escapades and the scrapes that he got up to, both here in this country and in Australia. I mean, in many ways, it's a wonder he's still alive. I mean, he took so many crazy risks. But what I really enjoyed about it as the book developed and he started to write more and more about his career as a chef and as an expert in food and taste and everything, is he struck me as something like a musician. You know, really good musicians, they're born with an ear for the notes. Almost before they can read or write, they can tell when something's slightly off key, when something is not quite in tune. And Rick's like that with taste and with presentation. He's like that with food. He's got the equivalent of a musician's ear. He's got a foodist tongue and taste buds, and by God does he use it to good effect.
I also thought he's very, again, this is earlier on in the book, but his discovery of girls.
Oh, it's hilarious. Every man reading that book will have said, "Yeah, been there." Yeah,
and his kind of awkwardness and the way he was so overwhelmed by them. I mean, it's not quite the in-betweeners, thank God, but it's actually.
Judy, let me, as a male of the species, let me tell you, there is something of the in-betweeners in every man you will ever meet.
Well, that explains a lot.
I didn't say it didn't.
You haven't missed any of our shows yet, you just haven't downloaded them. Check out whsmith.co.uk/Richard and Judy for more audio, video and recommended reads from the Autumn series.
Well, there you go. That's the Autumn collection of the Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to WHSmith. Done, dusted, finished.
But fear not, if you've missed any, here's a reminder of what you can find on the website.
Very much wanted to bring a note of authenticity into the book. General practice is a good place to start because, after all, general practice is a place of high drama.
They've announced a release date of November 25th, 2015. Matt Damon has signed on to play the main character, and Ridley Scott is set to direct.
I think it's an interesting term, isn't it, if to aspire to be a novelist. I think stop aspiring and stop perspiring, really, you know, get down to it.
Just a quick selection of our recommendations this time out.
And if you're intrigued, well, you can dip into the likes of The Fortune Hunter, The Martian and Someone Else's Skin by heading to our website.
Until next time,
take care.
Bye for now.
The Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to WHSmith. Don't let that be the final chapter. Join in the conversation. whsmith.co.uk/Richard and Judy. Don't forget you can download each and every book via Kobo for your e-reader or your smartphone via the free Kobo app.